Let's deep dive into a mind-blowing YouTube podcast created by artificial intelligence, where you will hear conversations by two AI agents in a way you've never imagined before. This isn't just a podcast, it's a journey into the future, crafted by AI, designed for you. Ready to have your mind blown? Let's begin.
All right, let's dive into this one.
Yeah.
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck by Mark Manson.
Oh,
You ever heard of this one?
I have heard of this book.
This is one of those books I feel like everyone was talking about for a while.
Yes, very popular.
And I know that the title might sound a little aggressive.
Yeah, it's a little bit in your face, right?
Yeah, but I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, definitely gets your attention.
Like he's trying to shake things up a bit in the self-help world.
Exactly. He's definitely not your typical self-help guru.
So what's this book really all about then?
Well, at its core, it's about being intentional with your energy, like you were saying, choosing what really matters, and letting go of all the things that don't.
So it's not about being like a jerk or not caring about anything.
No, not at all. It's more about recognizing that we can't care deeply about everything, so we have to make choices.
I think a lot of people might misinterpret that title.
Oh, for sure. It's definitely provocative.
Yeah.
But once you dig into the book, you realize it's about becoming very mindful of where you direct your energy.
That makes sense.
Mm.
And he definitely doesn't shy away from using strong language.
Nope. He's all about being direct and cutting through the BS.
Which I kind of appreciate.
Me too. It's refreshing.
So one of the first things he talks about is this concept called the feedback loop from hell. Have you ever gotten stuck in one of those?
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
What does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it's often when I'm feeling anxious about something, like a big deadline at work.
Yeah.
And then I start getting anxious about being anxious.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling.
Like, why am I so stressed about this? I shouldn't be this stressed. And it just spirals from there.
It's like you're adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Manson says we shouldn't do. Instead of resisting those negative emotions, he says we need to accept them.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does on the surface.
Yeah.
But his argument is that when we try to fight against our negative emotions, we actually make them stronger.
So instead of saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way, we should be more like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now, and that's okay.
Right. It's about acknowledging the reality of the situation without judgment.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So this ties into his point about choosing what to care about, right?
Absolutely. He uses this great example of Charles Bukowski, the writer.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him. Wasn't he known for being a bit of a, let's say, unconventional character?
He was definitely not concerned with fitting in. He was a bit rough around the edges, but he was a brilliant writer.
And he just kept writing no matter what people thought.
Exactly. He chose to care about his craft, not about external validation.
That's a pretty powerful lesson. It makes you think about all the things we waste energy worrying about. Things that ultimately don't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Right, like what other people think of us or how many likes we get on social media.
Yeah, exactly. All those things that can really suck up our energy if we let them.
It's about recognizing that we have a limited amount of time and energy, and we should invest them wisely.
So what are some things that you think people might be giving too many fecks about these days?
Oh, there are so many. Social media is a big one for sure. Comparing ourselves to others, trying to present this perfect image online.
It's exhausting.
It really is. And then there's work, relationships, politics, the news. It's easy to get caught up in a whirlwind of things that ultimately don't contribute to our happiness or well-being.
It's like we need to do a regular feck inventory and see where we're overspending our energy.
I love that. A fuck inventory. We should totally trademark that.
All right, so moving on. Manson throws out another pretty bold statement. Happiness is a problem.
Now, that sounds a little strange, right?
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive.
But his point is that true happiness doesn't come from avoiding problems altogether. It comes from finding problems that are meaningful to us.
So it's not about seeking a life that's completely free of stress or difficulty, because let's face it, that's probably impossible.
Exactly. It's more about leaning into the struggles that come with pursuing things that actually matter to us.
So it's like, if you're building a business, it's going to be stressful at times.
For sure. But those challenges are part of the process.
And they can actually lead to a deeper sense of satisfaction when you overcome them.
Absolutely. And it's the same with relationships. Navigating conflicts and disagreements can actually strengthen the bond between two people.
As long as you're doing it in a healthy way, of course.
Right. It's not about seeking out conflict, but about recognizing that it's a natural part of any meaningful relationship.
So constantly trying to maintain a perfectly happy, stress-free existence could actually backfire and make us feel less fulfilled in the long run.
Exactly. It's like trying to live in a bubble. You might feel safe and comfortable for a while, but eventually you're going to crave something more.
Something real, something with substance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another concept that Manson introduces. You are not special.
All right, hold on a second. Now he's just trying to be mean, right?
He's not. It's not meant to be an insult. It's actually a very liberating idea.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain this one.
Well, Manson argues that this whole idea that we all have to be extraordinary or exceptional can be incredibly damaging.
It's like we're constantly being told we need to be the best, the brightest, the most talented.
And that can create so much pressure and anxiety, because what happens when we inevitably face setbacks or realize that we're not a prodigy at everything?
It can be pretty demoralizing.
Exactly. And that's why Manson suggests embracing our averageness.
So instead of trying to be the next Mozart or Einstein,
We can find freedom in just being ourselves.
it's about taking the pressure off and focusing on personal growth and pursuing our passions simply because we enjoy them.
Right. And that's a much more sustainable and fulfilling way to live.
It's funny because when you think about it, there's a lot of beauty in the ordinary.
Absolutely. There's joy to be found in everyday experiences and simple pleasures.
And it's those little things that often make life so rich and meaningful.
It's about appreciating the journey, not just chasing after some elusive destination.
So instead of always striving to be special, what if we just focused on being present and engaged in our lives?
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding fulfillment in the moment, not in some future achievement or accolade.
It's about shifting our focus from, look at me, I'm so special, to, I'm curious about the world and I want to experience it fully.
Exactly. And that brings us to another powerful idea from the book, the value of suffering.
Okay, now he's lost me. Who actually values suffering?
Well, no one enjoys suffering, of course, but Manson argues that it's an inevitable part of life.
I mean, he's not wrong about that.
And he goes further to say that suffering can actually be a source of growth and meaning.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
He uses the example of Dave Mustaine, the heavy metal musician.
Oh, yeah, the guy from Megadeth.
That's right. Mustaine was kicked out of Metallica and went on to form Megadeth, which became hugely successful.
So you think he'd be pretty happy with that?
You would, right. But even after achieving all that success, Mustaine still felt like a failure because he was constantly comparing himself to Metallica.
So he was letting his past suffering define him, even though he had achieved so much.
Exactly. And Manson's point is that our values determine what we're willing to suffer for.
So if our values are based on things like fame or fortune, then that suffering might feel empty or pointless.
But if our values are rooted in things like creativity, personal growth, or making a positive impact on the world, then suffering becomes an essential part of the journey.
It becomes a testament to our commitment to those values. It shows that we're willing to endure challenges and setbacks in order to pursue what truly matters to us.
Exactly. And that's a powerful perspective shift.
So it's not about seeking out suffering, but about recognizing that it's a part of life.
And that the way we perceive it, the meaning we assign to it, can dramatically affect our overall experience.
It's like that saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
I love that. It's so true. It's not the external circumstances that determine our happiness, it's our internal response to them.
So true. And that brings us to another crucial concept. Take responsibility.
This is where things start to get really empowering.
Because it means we have agency. We have the power to choose how we react to the things that happen to us.
Exactly. Manson argues that even when life throws us curveballs, even when we're dealt a difficult hand, we always have the power to choose how we respond.
We're not just victims of circumstance.
Right. He tells the story of William James, the father of American psychology.
What about him?
Well, James faced a lot of adversity in his life, but instead of giving in to despair, he chose to take responsibility for his outlook and his choices.
And through that process, he was able to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of difficulty.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that we always have a choice.
It might not be easy, but we can choose how we interpret our experiences and how we move forward.
And that choice can make all the difference.
So true. And speaking of moving forward, that brings us to another key idea. Failure is the way forward.
This is something we hear a lot these days, but Manson takes it a step further.
How so?
Well, he doesn't just talk about the importance of embracing failure. He provides a framework for using failure as a stepping stone to success.
So it's not just about accepting failure, it's about learning from it and using it to propel us forward.
Exactly. He shares his own personal experiences with failure, highlighting how those setbacks taught him valuable lessons and ultimately led him to where he is today.
And he talks about his do something philosophy, which emphasizes that action often precedes motivation.
In other words, don't wait for the perfect moment or for all the stars to align. Just start doing something, anything, toward your goals.
Because even if your initial attempts are imperfect, you'll gain valuable experience and momentum.
Exactly. And that momentum can lead to surprising breakthroughs.
So the next time you're feeling stuck or uninspired, just start taking action, even if it's just a small step.
Because that small step could be the catalyst for something amazing.
I love that. And this leads us to another important concept, the importance of saying no.
Yes. This is about setting boundaries and protecting our precious time and energy.
It's about saying no to distractions, commitments that don't align with our values, and even people who drain our energy.
It's about prioritizing what truly matters and creating space for the things that bring us joy and fulfillment.
So, for example, it might mean setting boundaries in your relationships.
Right. Saying no to behaviors that are disrespectful or harmful.
Or it could be as simple as declining invitations to events you don't actually want to attend.
Exactly. Saying no can be difficult, especially in a culture that often rewards busyness and people-pleasing.
It's like we're programmed to say yes to everything.
But it's crucial for living a life that is truly your own.
It's about recognizing that your time and energy are valuable, and you have the right to choose how you spend them.
Absolutely. And finally, we come to perhaps the most profound and potentially unsettling concept in the book, the certainty of death.
Okay, now he's really going deep.
I know it might seem like a heavy topic, but Manson approaches it in a surprisingly insightful and even empowering way.
So it's not about being morbid or dwelling on death in a negative way.
Not at all. It's about recognizing that our time here is limited and that we should make the most of it.
So it's a call to action, in a way.
Exactly. He shares a story about the death of a close friend, an experience that prompted him to reevaluate his own priorities and how he was spending his time.
And that experience led him to make some significant changes in his life.
It made him realize that he was wasting his precious time on things that didn't truly matter to him.
So it's about using that awareness of our own mortality to clarify what's truly important.
And to make choices that align with those values.
It's about asking ourselves, if I knew I had a limited time left, how would I live differently? What would I prioritize? What would I let go of?
Those are powerful questions to reflect on.
They really are. And I think that's a great place to pause for.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
We've explored some really thought-provoking ideas, from the feedback loop from hell to the importance of taking responsibility and embracing failure.
And we've touched on the liberating power of accepting our so-called averageness and the idea that suffering can actually be a source of growth and meaning.
In the next part, we'll delve even deeper into these concepts and explore how we can apply them to our own lives in a practical way.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back, and we're digging deeper into the subtle art of not giving a feck.
Yeah, we covered some pretty dense stuff in part 1.
We did. I mean, the feedback loop from hell, choosing your values, happiness as a problem.
Right. It's a lot to unpack.
And I think one of the most important things to remember is that Manson isn't saying we should just stop caring about everything.
Right. It's not about becoming some kind of unfeeling robot.
Yeah, exactly. It's not about apathy.
It's more about being selective.
With our energy.
Exactly. You only have so much to give.
So it's about focusing on the things that truly matter to us and letting go of the rest.
Yeah, and that actually takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does.
Yeah.
Because you have to figure out what those things are.
You have to pay attention to how you react to different situations.
And what drains your energy.
And where you're maybe giving too many fucks about things that don't really serve you.
Yeah. And remembering that you always have a choice.
Always.
Yeah.
Even when things feel totally out of control.
You can choose how you respond.
That's the power of taking responsibility.
Which can be hard.
It can be really hard, especially when we're so used to blaming other people or circumstances for our unhappiness.
It's like we're conditioned to look outside ourselves for the source of our problems.
But Manson is saying that real change starts from within.
With taking ownership of our choices.
And our outlook on life.
Even when it's difficult.
Especially when it's difficult. And you know, that reminds me of what we were talking about with failure.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in that fear of failure.
Oh, absolutely. It can be paralyzing.
But Manson argues that failure is an essential part of growth.
It's how we learn and adapt and become more resilient.
And he really emphasizes that do something philosophy.
Right. Don't wait for motivation to strike. Just take action.
Even imperfect action.
Even if it's just a small step.
Because that small step can create momentum.
And often that action sparks motivation.
It's like a chain reaction.
Think about a time when you were putting off a task,
Oh, yeah. All the time.
You just didn't feel like doing it.
But then you finally force yourself to get started.
And maybe you even started to enjoy it.
It happens.
Because we build things up in our minds.
We make them seem so much bigger and scarier than they actually are.
But when we take that first step,
The fear starts to dissipate.
and we realize we're capable of more than we thought.
And that brings us back to setting boundaries.
Which is all about saying no to the things that drain us.
And saying yes to the things that energize us.
And it can be tough to do.
Especially for people pleasers.
But it's so important for protecting our time and energy.
It's not selfish to set boundaries.
It's actually a form of self-care.
And it allows us to show up more fully for the people and things that truly matter to us.
It's about making conscious choices about how we spend our precious resources.
Because our time and energy are finite.
And we can't be everything to everyone.
And this all ties back to Manson's point about choosing what to care about.
If we're constantly saying yes to things that drain us or don't align with our values,
We're essentially giving our flex away to things that don't deserve them.
it's about recognizing that our energy is precious.
And that we should invest it wisely.
And that brings us to the idea of death.
Yeah, which can be a little bit heavy.
I know, but it's not meant to be morbid or depressing.
It's actually a really powerful reminder to live with intention and purpose.
Because when we realize that our time here is limited,
It can motivate us to make the most of it,
to focus on the things that truly matter,
to pursue our passions, to nurture our relationships.
and to contribute to the world in a way that feels meaningful.
It's about asking ourselves those big questions.
Like, what do I want my legacy to be?
How do I want to be remembered?
What impact do I want to make on the world?
And it's not just about grand gestures or achieving some monumental level of success.
It can be as simple as showing up fully in our relationships.
Or pursuing our creative passions.
Or contributing to our communities in meaningful ways.
It's about recognizing that even small actions can make a difference.
And all of this ties back to Manson's idea that true happiness comes from solving problems that matter to us.
If we're not engaged in something that feels meaningful,
Something that challenges us.
something that requires us to grow,
It's easy to fall into a state of apathy or boredom,
and that's when we start looking for distractions.
or chasing after things that don't ultimately fulfill us.
So it's about finding those things that light us up,
The things that make us feel alive,
even if they involve struggle or discomfort,
because that's where the real growth happens.
outside of our comfort zones.
It's about embracing the messiness of life.
And recognizing that failure is not the opposite of success.
It's a necessary part of the journey.
It's about shifting our perspective.
From I need to be perfect to I'm willing to learn and grow, even if it means making mistakes along the way.
And it's about remembering that we're not alone in this journey.
Everyone faces challenges.
Everyone experiences setbacks.
Everyone has those moments of self-doubt.
It's all part of the human experience.
And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do
Is to reach out
connect with others.
and share our stories.
Because in that shared vulnerability,
In that recognition of our shared humanity
we can find strength and support.
and a renewed sense of purpose. Okay, so here we are, part 3 of our deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a feck.
You know, it's funny because I was thinking about all the stuff we talked about in parts 1 and 2.
Yeah, like the whole feedback loop from hell, taking responsibility for your reactions. Even, like, remember, we talked about contemplating death,
Right. Not in a morbid way.
but in a way that helps you, like, figure out what really matters.
Yeah, totally. And you know what I was thinking about?
What's that?
It's like all that stuff is really interesting, right?
It is. It's like heady stuff.
But how do we actually like take all those ideas and, put them into practice?
That's the challenge, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, we get the concepts, but how do we actually apply them in our daily lives?
Exactly. So I was thinking maybe for this last part, we could talk about some actual practical tips.
Yeah, I love that. Because what good is all this knowledge if we don't know what to do with it, right?
Exactly. So one of the most tangible takeaways for me from the book was the importance of setting boundaries.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was huge for me, too.
And it goes back to that whole idea of choosing what to care about.
And saying no to the things that drain our energy.
Right. It's about recognizing that we can't be everything to everyone.
And that saying yes to everything often means sacrificing our own well-being.
You know, I used to struggle so much with people-pleasing.
Oh, me too.
I felt like I had to say yes to every request.
Even if it meant, like, burning myself out.
Exactly. And it wasn't until I read this book that I really understood the power of setting boundaries.
It's not selfish, it's self-care.
Right. It's about recognizing that you have limited time and energy, and you need to be protective of those resources.
So how do we actually start setting boundaries? Where do we begin?
Well, Manson suggests starting small.
Small, like what kind of things?
It could be as simple as like declining that extra project at work when you already have a full plate.
Oh, yeah. Or like saying no to that social gathering when you're just exhausted and need some downtime.
Exactly. And it's about learning to communicate those boundaries clearly and assertively.
Without feeling like you have to over-explain or apologize.
Right. You get to own your choices.
So another thing that really stuck with me was Manson's emphasis on action over motivation.
The do something principle.
Yeah, we tend to wait for that perfect moment, that surge of inspiration before we start working towards our goals.
But often it's the other way around.
Action creates motivation.
So instead of waiting to feel motivated, just take that first step.
Even if it's something small.
Even if it's just for like 5 minutes.
Because the act of doing, of making progress, that's
Yeah.
what often sparks the motivation we need to keep going.
It's like, have you ever noticed that when you're putting off a task?
Oh, all the time.
You just don't feel like doing it.
But then once you force yourself to get started,
You actually start to enjoy it.
yeah, like you get into a flow.
It's because we build things up in our minds, we make them seem so much bigger and scarier than they actually are.
But when we take that first step, the fear starts to dissipate.
And we realize we're capable of more than we thought.
So the next time you're feeling stuck or uninspired, try setting a timer for like 15 minutes and just work on that thing you've been avoiding.
You might be surprised by how much you accomplish.
Yeah, and remember, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be progress.
Progress over perfection.
Exactly. Now, speaking of progress, let's talk about failure.
Oh, the F word.
It's so easy to let the fear of failure hold us back
From trying new things.
from pursuing our dreams.
But Manson reminds us that failure is an inevitable part of growth.
It's how we learn and adapt and become more resilient.
He encourages us to reframe our thinking about failure,
To see it not as a sign of weakness.
but as a valuable learning experience.
It's like, it's okay to not have all the answers.
It's okay to experiment, to take risks, and to know that even if we stumble,
We can pick ourselves up and keep moving forward,
and that brings us to the idea of values.
which are so important.
They really are, because our values determine what we're willing to suffer for.
Like, think about it. If you're constantly feeling stressed or unfulfilled,
It might be a sign that you're pursuing goals or engaging in activities that don't align with your core values.
it's about getting really honest with yourself.
Asking yourself those tough questions.
Like, what truly matters to me?
What am I willing to fight for?
And that's where contemplating our own mortality can be helpful,
Not in a morbid way.
but in a way that clarifies what's truly important in the grand scheme of things.
It's about asking yourself, if my time was limited, how would I choose to spend it?
That's a powerful question.
It can help us realign our priorities.
And focus on what truly brings us joy and meaning.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a feck.
I want to leave you with a challenge.
Challenge.
What's one thing you will stop giving a feck about starting today?
What boundary will you set?
What action will you take, even if you don't feel fully motivated?
It's about choosing your battles wisely
Accepting life's imperfections.
and focusing on what truly matters.
It's been such a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
It really has. This book has so much to offer.
It's definitely one of those books that I think everyone can benefit from reading,
And rereading.
because there's always something new to discover.
So, until next time.
Keep those facts in check.